How did ancient women handle their periods? You're about to discover what ancient women actually used when they didn't have pads or tampons, and it's way more fascinating than you'd think. Some of these methods are surprisingly effective. Others, well, you'll want to keep watching for those. The ancient world wasn't squeamish about periods. In fact, some civilizations were dealing with menstruation in ways that were oddly practical, and in some cases, downright genius. Let's start with Egypt, where women had access to something we still use today, papyrus, but not in the way you'd expect. Ancient Egyptian women didn't just write on papyrus, they soaked it in water to make it soft and absorbent, then shaped it into something resembling a pad. Cleopatra's era, same basic system, just refined over centuries. And here's the wild part. Papyrus actually has natural antimicrobial properties. These women were inadvertently using one of the most effective materials available in their region. Modern science later confirmed what they'd figured out through trial and error. Papyrus genuinely reduces bacterial growth. But Egypt wasn't the only place innovating. Jump forward to ancient Rome, and women were using something completely different, wool. Specifically, they were wrapping wool strips around their bodies during menstruation. The Roman physician Hippocrates actually documented this, and for good reason. Wool is absorbent, it's reusable if washed properly, and it was plentiful throughout the Mediterranean. Roman women would essentially create a primitive girdle system, fastening these wool strips with ties made from plant fibers. It worked well enough that similar methods persisted through the medieval period. Here's where things get interesting. Japan had an entirely different approach. Japanese women during the feudal period used something called kaminoke, which roughly translates to paper hair. They were using washi paper, handmade paper that's incredibly soft and absorbent. What's remarkable is that they were replacing these regularly throughout the day, understanding concepts of hygiene and freshness centuries before modern period products existed. This wasn't just about managing menstruation, it was about maintaining dignity and cleanliness. That matters. But not every ancient solution was quite so elegant. In ancient India and parts of Southeast Asia, women used plant leaves, specifically lotus leaves, banana leaves, and palm fronds. Folded and positioned carefully, these leaves were surprisingly functional. They were biodegradable, they were everywhere, and they actually had antimicrobial properties too. When you live in a tropical climate with ready access to specific plants, you work with what you have, and what they had actually worked. Here's something you probably didn't expect. Some ancient African communities used animal hide. Not in a barbaric way, they were softening animal hide through specific techniques, creating material that was surprisingly absorbent and durable. These could be washed and reused for months or even years. It was labor-intensive, but it was sustainable in a way that modern single-use products absolutely aren't. Now, let's talk about what might surprise you most. Women in medieval Europe, particularly in Britain and Northern Europe, used linen. Specifically, they incorporated linen strips into their undergarments or wore special linens that could be washed frequently. This is actually where the concept of menstrual management through clothing integration really evolved. By the 1700s, women had developed more sophisticated linen systems, almost like internal support garments designed specifically for that purpose. The wealthy could afford multiple sets that were washed regularly by servants. The poor? They made do with whatever fabric they could spare. But here's the shocking part about ancient periods that nobody talks about. Absence wasn't uncommon. In many ancient societies, malnutrition was so prevalent that irregular periods or amenorrhea, the complete absence of menstruation, was actually normal. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains have found evidence that many women in ancient civilizations experienced reproductive systems that shut down due to insufficient body fat and caloric intake. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it had massive historical implications for population growth, women's roles in society, and even economic development. There's also this fascinating element of secrecy and shame that varied wildly across cultures. While some societies were completely open about menstruation, treating it as a natural, manageable aspect of life, Others developed elaborate systems to hide it entirely. In some ancient Asian cultures, women would withdraw from public life during menstruation, not out of shame necessarily, but out of what they believed was spiritual necessity. In contrast, ancient Greek women were so open about discussing menstruation that Aristotle wrote extensively about it in scientific terms. Not always accurately, but he definitely wasn't shy about the topic. What connects all these ancient solutions is something we've kind of forgotten: ingenuity born from necessity. Women solved this problem using whatever their environment provided, and many of these solutions were, objectively speaking, not that bad. Papyrus was absorbent, wool worked, linen was effective. These women didn't have marketing companies telling them what to use. They had observation, experience, and the practical knowledge of what actually functioned. The transition to modern period products is actually remarkably recent. Kotex pads, the first commercial disposable pad, didn't hit the market until 1921. Before that, women had spent thousands of years managing periods with natural materials, and those natural materials, they worked well enough to sustain human civilization. What's truly mind-blowing is that as we've moved towards single-use, plastic-heavy products, women in developing countries are circling back to solutions similar to what their ancestors used. Reusable cloth pads are making a comeback. Natural plant-based materials are being reconsidered. In some ways, we're validating what ancient women already knew. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most practical one. The next time you think about ancient civilization, remember this: women weren't sitting around helplessly waiting for modern science to save them. They were innovating, adapting, and solving problems in ways that our ancestors would recognize as remarkable if they could see our technology today. Menstruation wasn't a medical emergency waiting for a solution. It was simply another aspect of human life that required practical management, and ancient women absolutely had it handled.